Exploring the Analects, Episode 13, Passages 4.8 and 19.22. In days of old, when kings were bold. Hey folks, this is Elliot Bernstein. Thanks for joining me for Episode 13 of Exploring the Analects. In this episode, we'll be covering passages 4.8 and 19.22 of the Analects, first reading them in Chinese and English, then discussing the historical and cultural context behind them to provide a deeper understanding. After that, we'll analyze the language found in the passages as a way to learn new words and phrases in classical Chinese and modern Mandarin. Be sure to follow along with the episode guide on analects.net, where you can also find all the Chinese characters for the passages and key terms in this episode. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at elliot@analects.net. All right then, let's get started. I've written a little limerick about passages 4.8 and 19.22. Don't take it too seriously, but I hope you enjoy it. In days of old, when kings were bold, and teaching weren't invented, Confucius set out on the road, but never felt contented. These passages are a story about Confucius's lifelong struggle to revive the ways of the ancient sage kings. We'll talk all about his frustrations in trying to do so, what his beliefs were about what the Tao, or the proper path to follow, was, and who in life he considered to be someone he could learn from. Now I'm going to read the passages in a modern Mandarin pronunciation, followed by translations into English. Passage 4.8's translation comes courtesy of Edward Slingerland's book, Analects, with selections from traditional commentaries. This is an excellent read if you're interested in seeing more from those pesky commentators I'm always talking about. Passage 19.22, well, I Frankensteined that one together all myself. All right, here they are. 4.8 子曰：朝闻道，夕死可矣。 The master said, having in the morning heard that the way was being put into practice, I could die that evening without regret. Passage 19.22. 魏公僧朝问有子贡曰：仲尼焉学？子贡曰：文武之道，未坠于地，在人。贤者识其大者，不贤者识其小者。莫不有文武之道焉。夫子焉不学，而亦何尝师之有？ Gongsun Chao from the state of Wei asked Zigong, who did your late master Confucius study with? Zigong replied, the way of kings Wen and Wu has not collapsed. It is still within individuals. Those rich in skill and wisdom preserve its greater aspects, and those with lesser talents preserve its smaller aspects. Since they all possess a piece of the way of kings Wen and Wu, from whom would the master not learn? So indeed, what single constant teacher should he have had? Let's start off our conversation about these two passages with what's by far the best known statement about the Tao, or the way. This is a cryptic phrase that serves as the very first line of the Tao Te Ching. Dao ke dao, fei chang dao. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the fundamental Tao. If you're a firm believer in that statement, I might suggest you turn off this podcast. But if you're going to take that approach, you might as well close the Tao Te Ching as well. There's a good reason for this advice, and it's not wrong from the Taoist perspective. The Tao is the way of nature. Talking about it, reading about it, that's not going to do the trick. It's something you've got to observe to know. As the kids say, touch grass, get out there, observe the world around you, and eventually you'll understand how things work. That's the Tao of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. That's the Tao that's really entered the popular imagination globally. It's a powerful and memorable concept of humanity's place in nature. That message has had a tangible impact on all the major religions and philosophies of China historically, and now around the world as well, with cute repackagings in books like The Tao of Pooh, and science fiction concepts like the Force and Star Wars. But the main point of this episode is to show that in the realm of Chinese philosophies, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi don't get a monopoly on the Tao. Buddhism, Confucianism, legalism, and Islam, every philosophy and religion in the Chinese realm has had something to say about the Tao. And that's because a Tao is most literally just a path. And a path is a powerful metaphor. If you follow the right path, it can lead you to a life of health and happiness, even love and prosperity. If you follow the wrong one, you're lost. Anyway, let's hop back to those Taoist classics again for a second, since they really can lead us to a better understanding of the Tao of Confucius. Funny thing about those Taoist classics, Confucian concepts and Confucius himself were so influential that even they couldn't avoid mentioning him. In fact, the so-called second foundational text of Taoism after the Tao Te Ching, the eponymous Zhuangzi, has story after story about Confucius. Now, no doubt, most of these are completely made up. They just use the character named Confucius as a foil to highlight Taoist concepts. But regardless, they give us a great place to start to introduce the Confucian vision of the Tao. Book 14 of the Zhuangzi, called Tian Yun, or the Turning of the Heavens, contains a story about an encounter between Lao Tzu and Confucius. According to the book, Confucius complained to Lao Tzu, explaining that he had studied the classics for decades, sought out ruler after ruler who might govern according to the ways of the ancient sage kings, and after all his efforts, none adopted his views and put them into practice. Lao Tzu replied that this was for the best. Those old books he so revered, they were relics of a time gone by. They'd be of no use to someone trying to understand how to live today, nor would they actually teach him the secrets of those ancient sage kings. Confucius, thought Lao Tzu, had seen footprints and mistaken them for shoes. Rather than observe how things were in the past to understand how people can live in harmony, focus on understanding how things are now in the world as we find it, and the road ahead will be smooth. Lao Tzu suggested each thing acts according to its own nature. Quoting the end of this book, "A pair of white herons look at each other with pupils that do not move, and impregnation takes place. The male insect emits its buzzing sound in the air above, and the female responds from the air below, and impregnation takes place. The creatures called lay are both male and female, and each individual breeds of itself. Nature cannot be altered. The conferred constitution cannot be changed. The march of the seasons cannot be arrested. The Tao cannot be stopped. If you get the Tao, there is no effect that cannot be produced. If you miss it, there is no effect that can." So, biological inaccuracies aside, the point is clear. Ignore the nature of things, and you'll accomplish nothing. But understand it and embrace it, and you will go far. This story ends with Confucius retreating to consider these ideas for 3 months, then returning to Lao Tzu, and apparently convinced, enthusiastically explaining them in his own words. That's the Tao that most people are familiar with. It's a naturalistic vision that encourages individuals to withdraw from society if possible. And where government and society are needed, it advocates for minimal intervention in the ways of nature. Zhuangzi's character of Confucius isn't completely unfair. Saying he was obsessed with ancient texts and seeking wisdom in the relics of times gone by is not wrong per se. Zhuangzi just saw the search for the Tao in ancient texts and artifacts as misguided, instead believing that in the way of nature, we can discover all we need to thrive. But Confucius was firmly focused on the human realm. He believed the towering figures of history and legend had worked hard to cut through the thicket and forge a path to a good life and a harmonious world. All he needed to do was mow down the weeds that had grown over that path, then guide people onto it, leading them back to a harmonious world. So with that extended introduction, and keeping in mind Zhuangzi's story, along with Confucius's belief that knowledge of the Tao was still within the people, let's finally dig into the meaning behind passages 4.8 and 19.22. Passage 4.8 is a lament. Remember Confucius's complaint from the story that he had studied the classics for decades, sought out a ruler who would govern according to his ideas, and never found one? That wasn't made up at all. Confucius spent 15 years on the road, and no matter how many states he visited, he never did find that ideal ruler. He was frustrated and disillusioned. As he got older, he hoped to see even one day of his life when those around him all acted with compassion. Read passages 19.8, 12.1, or 4.6. There's a long list of these laments. He desperately wanted to see even a small sign of change in his world. There's a lot of scholarly debate about what morning, evening, and here refer to in passage 4.8. Did Confucius mean every one of these words literally? That one could die fulfilled on the very day they hear about the Tao? Were they more figurative and mean that one should learn about the Tao early in life in order to pass away content later in life? The fact is, as usual, we just don't know. I mean, there's not even a clearly stated subject in this sentence. No I, a man, the gentleman, the people, there's nothing. So sure, a lot of those interpretations are plausible. But Confucius's life story leads me to one interpretation that I don't need to stretch to get to. He just wanted the world back on track. In other words, were I to hear the world is set on the right path, at that moment, I could die a happy man. If he could just find a ruler who was willing to seriously study the ways of those ancient sage kings, the Zhou dynasty founders Wen and Wu, and legendary leaders like Yao Shun and Yu, his life's work would be done. So that covers 4.8. Now on to the big one, 19.22. This passage is much more involved, and I'll start off by introducing the people and places mentioned. Gongsun Chao was a minister from the state of Wei. We don't know much about this person, just that he wanted to know about how Confucius was educated. As for the state of Wei, normally spelled W-E-Y in English, this was a small state not far from Confucius's home that had seen a pretty nasty royal family feud at that time. If you want a few details of that, listen to episode 12, Hiding Behind a Smile. It's a fun one. Zigong is best known as Confucius's businessman disciple. He was known for his way with words and for his political savvy. Now, we don't know exactly why Gongsun Chao was asking Zigong about Confucius, but it's not unlikely that Zigong either held political office in the state of Wei or was there on a diplomatic mission. In any case, as one of Confucius's main disciples, who appears frequently throughout the Analects, Zigong must have been considered an authority on the life and teachings of Confucius, so he was being asked to share some of that wisdom. The next individual mentioned is Confucius himself, but here he is referred to as Zhongni. I go into detail in the translation notes later, but this particular detail is important because many scholars believe that Zhongni was Confucius's posthumous title. If that's the case, this exchange would have happened after Confucius's death. This makes sense. Book 19 of the Analects is unique in the fact that it contains no passages directly quoting Confucius. Instead, this is a collection of quotes and stories about his disciples. So commentators generally believe it to be about events following his death. There are two more individuals mentioned by name in this passage, King Wen and King Wu. Knowing a bit about who these two are is really key to understanding 19.22. They're the so-called exemplars here, by which I mean the accomplishments and practices they're remembered for are meant to serve as examples of how we should live our lives and organize our world. We don't have time in this episode to tell it all, so I'll really get into their biographies another time. But the absolute shortest version of the story is that these were the first two kings of the Zhou dynasty. King Wen was known as a virtuous ruler who was able to attract many talented ministers to his court. He began the expansion of the Zhou state during the end of the Shang dynasty in the mid-11th century BCE. His son, King Wu, was known for his military prowess. He used the momentum built by his father's benevolent rule and, like a righteous wind, swept in and defeated the corrupt and cruel rulers of the Shang state. Now that we've covered all the key players, let's hop back to that story from the Zhuangzi for a second. I didn't name them earlier when I introduced the story, But you remember the ancient sage kings Lao Tzu said Confucius wouldn't be able to learn all about from those old books? Well, King Wen and King Wu were two of them. Lao Tzu revered nature, and Confucius revered people. Most highly of all, these guys. He believed legendary rulers Yao, Shun, and Yu, thought to have lived thousands of years before the Zhou, had discovered and passed down principles and practices for building a harmonious world. Those ways were inherited by the founders of the Zhou, bringing great prosperity to their kingdom for centuries. But the ways were corrupted and superseded as time went on, until the world was engulfed by the chaos of Confucius's time. And Confucius felt it was his job to restore and recover those ways. So, back to the dialogue in 19.22. This minister from Wei, Gongsun Chao, has asked Zigong who Confucius learned from. Zigong's most direct response to this question is to say that Confucius didn't consistently study with one single teacher, but that even so, he could never stop learning. And how exactly was he always learning? He did so by finding the Tao of the kings Wen and Wu in many people. The core of Zigong's answer, and where we'll understand the most about the Confucian vision of the Tao, is what he explains about how kings Wen and Wu have influenced people. Those rich in skill and wisdom remembered the great principles, and those with lesser talents remembered the lesser principles. So Confucius could find a teacher in many people just by trying to understand what of the Tao of the ancient sage kings they retained. And so, Zigong's point was, what need did Confucius have for a regular teacher? We're in the home stretch here, but I'd be remiss not to mention things have gotten a little vague here with these greater aspects of those rich in skill and wisdom and lesser aspects of those with lesser talents and all that. And I just can't let that sit there without giving you something to hang your hat on. We'll go back to those traditional commentaries for this part. Zhu Xi, the 12th century scholar who, by the way, is arguably the number 3 biggest Confucianism guy after Confucius and Mencius themselves, gives examples of these skilled people as Lao Tzu, revered for his views on nature and culture, Tenzi, the Viscount of Tan, revered for his knowledge of history, and Shi Xiang, music master Xiang, revered for his preservation of the ancient Zhou tunes and songs. History, music, and philosophy, these were the heavy hitters of culture, so preserving them was something that took richness in skill and wisdom. Then there were the bureaucrats and administrators, temple staff and artisans. These were the people who made sure things were named properly and organized correctly. They played the music, kept the records, conducted the rituals. These people also preserved the Tao. They just did so in a day-to-day fashion. Not everyone can be a big picture guy. Confucius still found teachers among them. Listen to episode 7, where we discuss passage 10.21. Ru Tai Miao, Mei Shi Wen. When he entered the grand temple, he asked about everything. That's about these folks. Confucius entered the temple. He took part in the rituals the staff were charged with preserving. He asked questions to understand their practices. And through this, he believed he was helping to clear that overgrown path. Let's move on and discuss the language in these passages. My goal here is putting a few things out there for language learners at any level. So as usual, if you don't find something for you, just give me a shout at elliot@analects.net. Starting off with 4.8, let's review the phrase. 子曰：朝闻道，夕死可矣. The master said, having in the morning heard that the way was being put into practice, I could die that evening without regret. If you're early in your Chinese studies, I suggest you focus on the characters wen, to hear news of something, dao, the way or a path, si, to die, and ke, can or possible. I'm putting these up front for this passage, and I'll do the same for the next, because the rest of my comments on the translation are a bit of a deep dive, and I don't want to get you lost in the weeds. Now for that deep dive. Zhao and xi mean morning and evening respectively. These meanings are preserved in Japanese even to today, but xi is no longer used in modern Chinese, and zhao has diverged. If you study Chinese history, you may know that when it's pronounced chao, this character may refer to a dynasty or a royal court. For example, Ming Chao is the Ming dynasty, and Chao Ting is the royal court. It's believed that since court business was conducted in the morning, this word shifted its original meaning to the one more common today. Wen Dao is literally to hear of the way. In modern Chinese, sometimes wen means to smell, but you can't smell the way unless you're Mickey Mouse smelling a freshly baked pie sitting on a windowsill. So this is the wen of xin wen, or news, something you hear about. Up to this point, without a clear subject, we have in the morning, hearing of the way. Now for what happens in the evening. 死可以. 死 is death, plain and simple. 可 is a generic word for can or possibility. So where does this without regret come from? We have to strengthen can because it's followed by the emphatic and finalizing particle yi. So it's okay to render 死可以 as surely I could die, but we need to make it sound less ominous. So expressing contentment despite death, we land on I could die without regret. Good evening to you. Now on to passage 19.22. Here it is again. 魏公僧朝问有子贡曰：中以焉学？子贡曰：文武之道，未坠于地，在人。贤者识其大者，不贤者识其小者。莫不有文武之道焉。夫子言不学，而亦何尝师之有？ Gongsun Chao from the state of Wei asked Zigong, who did your late master Confucius study with? Zigong replied, the way of kings Wen and Wu has not collapsed. It is still within individuals. Those rich in skill and wisdom preserve its greater aspects, and those with lesser talents preserve its smaller aspects, since they all possess a piece of the way of kings Wen and Wu. From whom would the master not learn? So indeed, what single constant teacher should he have had? Again, starting off with a list for early stage learners. First, I would check out the list of people and places we covered earlier in this episode. The state of Wei, the minister Gongsun Chao, who, by the way, has a two-character surname, Gongsun, Confucius's disciple Zigong, plus the ancient sage kings Wen Wang and Wu Wang. You'll also want to know when to ask, yue to speak, xue to learn or study, wei not yet, zai ren within people, though I have deep dive notes about this particular one below. Shi to know in the sense of being familiar or remember. Da and xiao, big and small. Bu, not, and yo, to have or possess. If you're a bit more advanced and trying to beef up your classical Chinese, this is a great passage to do a deep dive on yan with. We see three distinct meanings. First, asking a question as from whom. Second, as a prepositional phrase, within them. And finally, as a rhetorical, from whom. You also get a fair bit of zhe usage, referring both to individuals and abstractions, such as 贤者时其大者. So now for that deep dive. Let's jump to where Gongsun Chao from Wei asked Zigong a question about Confucius. He uses the word yan to ask where did he study. This yan has various meanings in classical Chinese, but here it's a question word, most literally meaning where or how. But Zigong's answer focuses on who, making it clear that Gongsun Chao wants to know who Confucius's teacher was. It's like you're in school and someone asks, which classroom is yours? Sure, you could say room 202, but you could as easily say Miss Kerbapple's classroom and still have answered the question reasonably. So Zigong responds by talking about Wen Wu Zhi Dao, the way of kings Wen and Wu. No word for king appears here, but it's fully understood. Imagine I said Washington and Lincoln. If you're from the US, you know exactly who I mean. The way of kings Wen and Wu, he says, Wei zhui yu di. Wei, it has not yet. Zhui yu di, fallen to the ground. For me, collapsing works. You could use some other shorthand to capture this, being discarded, lapsing, and so forth. Wei adds still to the following clause for clarity and emphasis as well. Now Zigong points out that the way is zai ren. It is within individuals. I want to make a point about ren. How to translate something so simple is actually contentious. Payman Ni and Ames and Rosemont render it as the people, Slingerland as people, Moss Roberts as the living, and Legg and D.C. Lau as men. It's just not obvious what to do here, but here's my take on it and why I landed on individuals. In the context of the analects and the classical Chinese used during Confucius's time, the word min would be used if it was the people that Zigong wanted to refer to. The people sounds to me like the common people, and I don't believe that's who Confucius was referring to in this part. Because like it or not, Confucius felt the common people needed to be shown the way by leaders at various levels of society. Not only that, but these exemplary leaders, we already have a good idea of who they are. They were those ancient sage kings, plus the inheritors of the sage kings culture in their time. Lao Tzu, the Viscount of Tan, music master Xiang, and those temple officials, people like that. So, not the people, not people in general either, and not simply the living. Men doesn't really cut it either, even though it's likely technically true that these exemplars were all exclusively men. So I go with individuals to indicate specific people, those of greater or lesser talent and skill, who were preserving the way. Next, we see a parallel structure between xian da and bu xian xiao. Xian typically refers to a so-called worthy person. And the ancient roots of this word xian, in fact, mean worth a lot, as in wealthy. But the way I see it, calling someone a worthy really falls flat to modern readers. So I get a little prescriptive here and translate it as those rich in skill and wisdom. And the opposite is those with lesser talents. Remember, again, we're referring to those lists of people like Lao Tzu, the Viscount, and the music master on the one hand, and temple officials, bureaucrats, and craftspeople on the other. Some preserve major cultural practices, some preserve minor cultural practices. Just a few more phrases and we'll wrap this one up. 莫不由文无之道焉. Literally, none do not possess the way of Wen and Wu within them. This begins with a double negative. 莫不由, none do not have. That is, this is something they all have. Wen Wu zhi dao, we already covered, the way of kings Wen and Wu. And finally, yan, appearing for the second of 3 times. This time, rather than being a question word, it means therein or within them. I added a piece, reflecting the fact that the whole of the Tao is not contained within any of these individuals. That's made clear by the earlier part of the phrase, but it could become ambiguous if not restated. 夫子言不学 and 而已何尝是之有 are 2 parts of the same question. Fuzi is the master. It's a common way to refer to not just any master, but Confucius specifically. Yan, this is the third meaning, from whom, like its first appearance, but unlike the first appearance, this question is rhetorical this time. And 不学 would not learn. Put together, from whom would the master not learn? Finally, re, so indeed. R is a slippery grammatical particle here that would easily translate to and. From mo through to fuzi to r, this whole point is tied together. It's much better to go with so to drive that point home. He is a general question word for what. And for changshi, we've already seen chang in this episode in the phrase 道可道非常道. In that case, we went with fundamental. But it's confusing to call a teacher fundamental. The point is, he didn't have one teacher he regularly studied with. So, single, constant, awkward as it is, that's where I landed. Last of all, 只有. This is a grammatical inversion to stress the point about the teacher. 而已有和常识 would be grammatically correct, but reordering it is intended to place the listener's attention on the teacher. As I mentioned, 莫, 夫子, and儿, these 3 phrases are logically linked, so there is an implied since at the beginning of the 3. You gotta watch out for those hidden words. All right, folks, thanks for sticking with me. Again, I'm your host, Elliot Bernstein. I hope this episode of Exploring the Analects left you with a little glimpse into what the Tao of Confucius is. Don't forget to visit analects.net to check out the episode guide. and drop me a line at elliot@analects.net if you've got any questions or comments. Join me again next time when we'll discuss passages 7.12 and 9.13. This episode is going to be dedicated to my dear old dad, who wanted to know if the Analects ever mentions business or markets. Well, it sure does, and I'll tell you all about it. See you there.